World War II was fought on the ground, on the sea, in the air, on the printed page, but also in the museums. Museums took a major part in the war propaganda efforts of all nations involved in the war, from Russia to Great Britain to Germany and the United States of America. Images of these exhibitions today represent a major trace of this intense effort made to mobilize populations far away from the front line. An excellent account of exhibitions developed on the Allied side is given in 1943 in an article written for the London journal The Architectural Review by Gerhard Kallmann, a young architect emigré to Britain. In this article, Kallmann writes, "In no other field of art and architecture have the war brought us so generous and so healthy a harvest as in exhibition design." Kallmann discussed the intense program of exhibitions developed since the beginning of the war, in particular by the British Ministry of Information, and in considering these exhibitions he pointed to the novelty introduced by wartime programs that allowed modernist ideas which were banned from official British architecture and official British propaganda to reach the public, thanks to the mobilization of aesthetic and semantic strategies used by modern artists, in particular the Surrealists. Coleman discussed the intense program of exhibitions developed since the beginning of the war by the Ministry of Information. The ministry had implemented its policy under the aegis of Frank Pick, who had been the visionary director of the London Underground in the 1930s. He invited innovative designers such as Misha Black, Milner Gray and Peter Gray to work on presentations with the goal of stigmatizing the Germans, promoting economy in the use of resources, acknowledging the American support, and also containing the British communists. The specific skills of architects were used for various purposes in making propaganda exhibitions that were contained inside the walls of museums or that were traveling to distant sites on the front and to the rear, but also to build extraordinary new projects, such as the Hall of Trophies designed by Soviet architect Alexei Shchusev for Moscow's Gorky Park. This structure was meant to be a permanent exhibition of military equipment seized from the Germans after the Battle of Moscow in 1941, which was the major turning point of the war on the European continent, and displayed Junkers plane, armor, and other lost equipment. West of the Atlantic, North American museums played a very important role in mobilizing the population, thanks to a series of exhibitions that aimed at reproducing and transmitting the experience of people who had been under the bombs or had experienced the direct blows of the war. New York's Museum of Modern Art, which had played an active role in promoting the New Deal's progressive agenda throughout the 1930s, served with determination the military engagement of the United States. The first exhibition at MoMA, Britain at War, conveyed the British experience to the American audience. Even before Pearl Harbor, MoMA agitated for an entry of the United States into the war, celebrating wartime forms as designed in England. The catalogue included, for instance, a text by the librarian of the Royal Institute of British Architects claiming that every bomb that falls is a stimulus to creation. The most celebrated of all the wartime shows at MoMA was probably The Road to Victory, opened in 1942 under the artistic direction of photographer Edward Steichen, who brilliantly exploited the capacity of photography to structure a dramatic itinerary through the exhibition and through the war theaters. The subtitle of the show was A Procession of Photographs of a Nation at War. It was implemented by very large prints and designed by Herbert Bayer, formerly of the Bauhaus. Over the course of the exhibition, whose main spatial element was a winding ramp that provided views of dozens of images at once, one could find traces of previous exhibitions, like the one of the German Werkbund in Paris in 1930, but also of many of the experimental rhetorical strategies developed by Russian constructivists such as Rodchenko or Lisitsky. After the Road to Victory, wartime housing extended and exploration engaged at the Museum of Modern Art in 1932. The curator was Elliot Noyce, then director of the Department of Industrial Design. The exhibition was a way of putting the public in a position of decision about the way in which post-war American suburbs would go. Would they go into the direction of a pre-war type of boring, repetitive suburbs, or to move into the direction of the modernized garden city? One of the slogans of the show was, The smartest thing a town can do is to start thinking right now of what it wants to be when the war is over, as the community can benefit or suffer as a result of its housing. War work can be the best thing that ever happened to a town, or the worst. Airways to Peace, produced by MoMA in 1943, had often been overlooked. The show aspired at conveying to the American audience the idea that the post-war times would be determined by aviation. It was organized by Wendell Willkie, who had been a progressive Republican candidate running against Roosevelt. He wrote, "The modern airplane creates a new geographical dimension. The American people must grab at these new realities if they are to play their essential role in winning the war and building a world of peace and freedom." This exhibition illuminated the civic engagement of museums dealing not only with architectural issues, but also using their vantage point to participate and promote forward-looking initiatives. Surprising exhibitions took place in occupied Europe. In 1940, the Germans had captured 459 architects in the French army. They were all put in a single prisoners' camp in eastern Prussia and started a Beaux-Arts atelier there. An exhibition of architect prisoners was organized in Paris, in which hundreds of drawings of regional buildings were shown. These prisoners were totally controlled by conservative Catholics such as Henri Bernard, who later became a significant Paris architect. These projects prepared in Germany led to several exhibitions, the last one being organized in early August 1944 in Paris, weeks before the liberation of the French capital. Exhibition programs didn't stop with the end of the war in September 1945. They continued in various countries, in particular in Britain and France. In London, the Victoria and Albert Museum organized a mammoth exhibition in 1946 entitled "Britain Can Make It." The first section of the exhibition, as shown on this plan, had the title "War to Peace" and documented the way in which technologies developed during the war in the realm of plastics, aluminum, inflatable structures and the like could be transformed into peaceful objects for everyday use. After the war, French institutions organized exhibitions devoted to reconstruction and celebrating the contribution of America not only to the liberation of the country, but also to the creation of a new material civilization. Opened in Paris' Grand Palais in 1946, American Technologies for Habitation and Urbanism 1939. 1940X referred to the mysterious vintage 1940X, which had been used by the Architectural Forum in a memorable series of articles. The organizers were Paul Nelson, a student of Auguste Perret and an American architect, and the young architect and later historian Anatole Kopp. Exhibitions held in Paris and London in the summer of 1946 showed that after having been a key instrument in mobilizing the population for the wartime effort, exhibitions could now serve a different purpose. They could now help the population to face the challenges of peace, to learn again how to live in a climate of modernization using wartime technologies for peaceful purposes.